The old movie theater had been around for nearly a century. It was one of those grand Art Deco-style cinemas with deep red carpets, gold-trimmed curtains, and a lingering scent of stale popcorn mixed with something older, something musty, like forgotten memories trapped in the velvet seats. I started working the night shift a few months ago. It wasn't supposed to be a difficult job, just locking up, checking the projection rooms, and making sure no drunks or squatters snuck in after closing. The place was mostly dead after midnight, and aside from the occasional couple trying to sneak into an empty theater for privacy, I had the building to myself. At first, I didn't mind the isolation. I even liked it. There was something peaceful about walking through the silent halls, hearing only the hum of the soda machines and the faint creak of the old floorboards. But then I started noticing things. The first time it happened, I was finishing up my rounds. I had just checked the main screening rooms and was heading toward the projection booths when I heard it, faint, almost distant, but unmistakable. A whisper. It came from one of the old storage rooms upstairs, the one that used to be an office back in the 50s but was now filled with broken seats and unused film reels. No one ever went in there. No one should have been in there. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as I aimed it down the dim hallway. The door to the storage room was closed. I was sure of it. I had passed it not 5 minutes ago and it had been locked. But now it was open. Just a crack. A deep, sickening dread settled in my stomach. I took a step closer, my breath caught in my throat. The door creaked softly as I nudged it open with my foot. Inside, the storage room was just as cluttered as I remembered: dusty old chairs, tangled film reels, a projector covered with a tattered cloth. Nothing looked disturbed. But the whispering continued. It was coming from the far corner, where the shadows were the darkest. My flashlight flickered. And then I saw it. Something moved. Something that should not have been there. The employee working that night was Daniel Ruiz, a 27-year-old former college student who had dropped out due to financial struggles. He had no real passion for the job, but it paid his bills barely. He had been working at the theater for 6 months, mostly taking the night shifts because they were quiet and allowed him to be alone with his thoughts. Daniel wasn't scared easily. He had grown up in a rough part of Queens, seen his fair share of real-life horror things far worse than ghost stories. But there was something different about this place at night, something that made his skin crawl. And now, standing in that dark storage room, flashlight trembling in his hand, he realized he wasn't alone. Daniel's breath came slow and shallow. His grip on the flashlight tightened. The movement in the corner had been subtle, barely more than a shift in the darkness, but he was certain he had seen it. "Hello?" His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. Silence. The whispering had stopped. Daniel took a step forward, his sneakers crunching against the dusty floor. The beam of light from his flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating the mess of old theater equipment. Nothing. And then, a sharp, metallic clink. Daniel flinched, spinning toward the sound. One of the film reels had fallen off a stack and rolled slightly across the floor, stopping a few feet away. His heart pounded. Something had to have knocked it over. A draft? A rat? Or something else? Daniel swallowed hard and forced himself to step closer. He crouched down, reaching for the reel. And that's when he saw them. Footprints. Faint but unmistakable, outlined in the dust. And they weren't his. They led away from where he was standing toward the farthest corner of the room, where an old wooden cabinet stood, its door slightly ajar. The whispering started again. This time it came from inside the cabinet. Daniel's body screamed for him to run. Every instinct, every survival mechanism in his brain told him to get the hell out. But something held him there. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was the same kind of morbid curiosity that made people slow down to look at car crashes. Or maybe deep down he already knew. Whatever was in that cabinet knew he was there too. Slowly, against every ounce of better judgment, Daniel reached for the handle and pulled it open. The cabinet door groaned as Daniel pulled it open, the rusted hinges straining against years of neglect. The scent of stale wood and dust billowed out, mingling with the faint, lingering odor of something damp, something that had been shut away for far too long. His flashlight trembled in his grip, the beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty shelves coated in a thick layer of dust. At first it seemed like there was nothing there. No hidden squatters, no vermin scurrying away from the sudden intrusion of light. Just cobwebs and the forgotten remains of whatever the theater's former owners had once stored inside. But then, a sound. Not the whispering this time. Something softer. A breath. Short. Shallow. Almost imperceptible. Daniel felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air. The weight of something unseen pressing against the stillness of the room. The sensation of being watched. The hair on his arms stood on end, an icy prickling crawling up the back of his neck. He stepped back, his own breath catching in his throat, waiting, listening. The air felt heavier now, the silence charged with something electric, something just beneath the surface of perception. His heart pounded against his ribs, the thudding pulse almost deafening in the stillness. And then movement. Not in front of him. Not from within the cabinet. But behind him. The whispering returned. Closer this time. Right at his back. Daniel spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, the narrow beam struggling to push against the suffocating darkness. The chairs, the film reels, the stacks of old posters, everything was exactly where it had been a moment ago. Nothing had moved. And yet he knew. Something had changed. Something was there. His pulse roared in his ears as he tried to steady his breathing, his thoughts scrambling for logic, for reason, for any explanation that didn't involve the gnawing sense of dread coiling in his gut. The door. He needed to get to the door. Slowly he took a step back, then another, keeping his light steady, scanning every corner, every shadow, every crevice where someone could be hiding. The storage room wasn't large, but in that moment, it felt endless, the dim, flickering glow of the old hallway light barely visible through the half-open door. He reached for the handle. And the whispering stopped. For the briefest second there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Just absolute, suffocating silence. Then, the door slammed shut. A gust of air rushed past him, extinguishing the warmth from his skin, and the darkness surged forward, swallowing the room whole. The door slammed so violently that Daniel felt the force vibrate through the floor. His hand was still outstretched, fingers frozen in midair where the handle had been a second ago. Now only solid wood met his touch. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, pulse hammering beneath his skin. His flashlight flickered. The room was so dark now that the walls felt as though they had disappeared. Only the thin, wavering beam of his flashlight remained, carving out a narrow path of dim yellow light against the void. Daniel pressed his back to the door, his breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Something was different. The air had changed, thickened, as though he had stepped into a place not meant for him. A wrongness settled over him like a weight, an oppressive, unseen presence pressing against his chest, filling his lungs with something cold and damp. The whispering hadn't returned. But there was something else now. A sound so faint it was almost imperceptible. Breathing. Slow. Measured. And it wasn't his own. Daniel clenched his jaw, gripping the flashlight tighter, forcing himself to move. He turned the beam toward the farthest corner of the room, the space just beyond the toppled film reels, where the air felt heaviest. His pulse stuttered. There was nothing there. No person. No movement. Just shadows. But the moment his flashlight settled on that spot, the breathing stopped. A stillness filled the room, absolute and unnatural, like the air itself had frozen in place. The silence pressed against his eardrums, thick and suffocating, stretching out for too long, long enough that his own breath sounded foreign, too loud, too alone. Then, a soft shuffle. Not loud. Not abrupt. Just a shift in the darkness. The kind of sound a bare foot might make against a dusty floor. Daniel's muscles tensed, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. But his feet wouldn't move. His fingers trembled around the flashlight, and for the first time he realized he was still aiming it at the same spot. The light hadn't moved. But something had. The darkness in the corner seemed thicker now, deeper, as if it wasn't just an absence of light but something more. A presence that absorbed the glow of the flashlight rather than reflecting it. A void, dense and shifting, almost imperceptibly. Daniel exhaled through his nose, slow and careful, his mind racing through every possible explanation. Dust in the air. His own panic distorting his vision. A trick of the old, uneven lighting. And then, the shadows blinked. His breath caught. Not a trick. Not a hallucination. 2 pinpricks of deeper blackness had opened within the void. Watching him. Motionless. Waiting. And then, a second pair. And a third. Daniel's stomach twisted violently. He staggered back, pressing himself harder against the door, trying to convince himself that he wasn't seeing what was right in front of him. The eyes weren't human. They weren't animal. They were wrong. Too deep. Too endless. A hollow nothingness that swallowed light and thought and reason, stretching back into something far older than the dust that lined this room. And then they moved. Not forward. Not toward him. They shifted. Rearranging. Multiplying. Merging. The darkness around them twisted, reshaping itself not into a form, not into a person, but into something that suggested a form. A suggestion of movement where there was none. Daniel couldn't breathe. His chest locked up, his legs shaking so badly he almost collapsed. The whispering returned, low and fragmented, curling around him like tendrils of smoke, slipping into his ears, his skin, his thoughts. Not words. Not a language. Just sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering stopped. The room fell into silence. But the darkness still watched. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Daniel stood paralyzed, his breath shallow and uneven, his fingers clenched so tightly around the flashlight that his knuckles ached. The beam, trembling in his grip, barely cut through the thick blackness before him. The eyes, or what he thought were eyes, remained fixed in place, impossibly deep, devoid of light, drinking in his presence as though they were something more than just sight. Something aware. The air pressed against him, heavier now, thicker with the scent of dust and something else, something damp and old, like rotting wood left too long in the rain. It filled his lungs, seeped into his skin. The room around him was silent, but silence had never felt so alive. He tried to move. His legs refused. A creeping sensation crawled up his spine like something standing just behind him, leaning in close, breathing against his neck. But he didn't dare turn around. He knew that whatever was in the room with him wasn't behind him. It was in front. Still watching. Still waiting. The whispering hadn't returned, but its absence was almost worse. The room felt stretched thin, like reality itself was being pulled taut, warping under a pressure he couldn't name. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, his pulse roaring in his ears, but beneath it, beneath the trembling hum of his own fear, he thought he heard something else. A sound so faint, so distant that it almost wasn't there. A creak. Barely more than a sigh of wood settling. Then another. And another. Rhythmic. Steady. Footsteps. His stomach twisted. Not the cautious shuffle of a rat. Not the aimless scurry of something small moving through the dark. No. These were slow, deliberate steps. Measured. Careful. Coming closer. Daniel sucked in a breath through his teeth, forcing his body to move, forcing his fingers to tighten around the handle of the door behind him. It wouldn't budge. The old, warped wood held firm against his weight, refusing to give even as he pressed himself harder against it. The footsteps stopped. The air grew impossibly still. The silence stretched. Then, just beyond the reach of his flashlight, just at the very edge where light met dark, something shifted. Not like before. Not a flicker of movement in the shadows. This time, the darkness itself seemed to peel away, pulling back in slow, deliberate waves, as if it had only been hiding something beneath it. And for the first time, Daniel saw it. Not a figure. Not a person. A shape. Wrong in every way. Tall, but not in the way a person was tall. There were no clear limbs, no clear edges. Only suggestions, a bend where there shouldn't be, a hollow where something should be solid. A form that existed between forms, flickering at the edges like a reel of film burning in the projector, skipping frames, disjointed, incomplete. Daniel's breath hitched. His mind rejected what he was seeing, his instincts screaming at him that it shouldn't be possible, that it wasn't real. But the floor creaked again. And it was closer. Too close. His flashlight sputtered. The shadows reached forward. And then, the door behind him burst open. The weight of his own panic sent him tumbling backward into the hallway, his vision spinning, his breath catching in his throat as he scrambled to his feet. The storage room remained open before him, still cloaked in darkness. But the shape, the thing was gone. The whispering too had vanished. Only silence remained. And then, from deep within the room, a single sound. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Just a quiet, deliberate tap, like a single fingernail against glass. A warning. A promise. A reminder that whatever was in that room was still watching. Daniel staggered back into the hallway, his breath ragged, his hands shaking so violently that the flashlight rattled against his palm. His legs felt weak beneath him, like the ground had become something unreliable, something he could sink into at any moment. The heavy door to the storage room gaped open before him, a wound in the dim corridor, the darkness within pulsing like something alive. The tap echoed again. Soft. Measured. Just once. Like a slow heartbeat. Daniel took another step back. Then another. His body screamed at him to run, to turn, to bolt down the empty theater hall and never come back, but something about the space between him and that doorway felt wrong. Like if he turned his back to it, something would pull him back in. The silence swallowed him whole. The theater itself seemed to hold its breath. The old walls, the peeling Art Deco wallpaper, the dim sconces flickering weakly overhead, it all felt like a backdrop. A set piece. A thing that existed only because it was being watched. And that thought, more than anything else, filled him with a terror he couldn't name. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move, to keep stepping backward, to put space between himself and whatever had been inside that room. He thought of the building's history, the crumbling newspaper clippings framed in the lobby, the faded black and white photos of old Hollywood premieres from a time when this place had mattered, had been alive. Now it was just a husk. A forgotten shell of something that had once been grand. But not empty. Never empty. The moment Daniel reached the end of the hall, his back pressing against the cold marble of the lobby's concession stand, he stopped. The old, glass-covered popcorn machine loomed beside him, its insides long since emptied, its reflective surface dulled by years of grease and dust. He didn't want to see his reflection. Didn't want to see if there was something standing behind him. But some things are impossible to ignore. His gaze flickered sideways. And in the grimy, smudged reflection of the popcorn machine, he saw the hallway behind him. The open doorway. The stretch of empty carpet leading back toward the storage room. And something else. Something stepping out. Daniel's chest locked up. The figure in the reflection wasn't whole. It didn't move the way it should. The flickering suggestion of a body, like light struggling through warped film, shifting between shapes with every half-second of existence. It wasn't facing him. Not directly. But it was aware of him. He could feel it. It knew that he was watching. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. A cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck. His ears rang with something high-pitched and distant, something that wasn't quite sound. And then, the smell. It rolled in slow, almost too faint to notice at first. A scent thick with something burned, something rotted, something old. Like forgotten celluloid melting beneath the heat of a dying projector. Daniel wrenched his eyes open, his breath hitching. But the reflection was empty. The hallway stood undisturbed. The storage room's door still gaped open, but nothing stood there anymore. And that was worse. Because he knew. Somehow it was closer now. The whispering returned. Not from the hallway. Not from the reflection. From behind the counter. Daniel bolted. His sneakers skidded against the slick, waxed floor of the lobby as he sprinted toward the exit, his legs screaming with every step. The glass doors leading to the street loomed ahead, their smudged panes reflecting only the dim orange glow of the streetlights outside. Just a few more steps. Just a little further. The whispering swelled, rising, distorting, warping into something that felt like breath against his ear. He slammed into the doors. They didn't budge. Locked. Daniel's pulse roared. His hands scrambled at the latch, the metal ice cold beneath his fingers. His keys, where were his keys? His pockets, he had them, he knew he had them. The whispering stopped. Daniel went rigid. He could feel it. Something behind him. Close. Waiting. Watching. The street outside had never looked so distant. A single tap, soft and deliberate, sounded against the glass of the door. But it hadn't come from outside. It had come from his own reflection. His own hand moving on the other side of the glass. But he hadn't moved. His breath caught in his throat. His own reflection was watching him. And then, it smiled. Daniel's breath faltered. His reflection, his own face, his own body stood frozen in the glass, but the expression looking back at him wasn't his. The mouth curled at the edges in a slow, deliberate grin, one that didn't belong to him, one that stretched just a little too wide. The corners of the lips dragged upward, straining, as if something inside the reflection was trying to mimic human expression but didn't quite know how. And the eyes. His eyes in the glass were wrong. Too deep. Too hollow. Like the reflection wasn't showing him himself anymore. Like it was showing him something else wearing his face. His fingers trembled against the cold metal of the door handle. His mind raced, screaming at him that this wasn't possible, that mirrors didn't work like this, that he didn't work like this. He lifted his left hand, slow, shaking, testing the glass. His reflection didn't move. It stood still, smiling. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He yanked his hand back, his whole body recoiling from the door, the air around him too thick, too heavy, too wrong. He stumbled back toward the concession counter, his knees threatening to give out beneath him. The whispering had stopped. The thing in the storage room was gone. But somehow this was worse. Because this was him. Or something that wanted to be. The reflection's head tilted, slow and unnatural, like the neck inside the glass didn't have bones, like it was only imitating movement. The grin never wavered. Daniel's pulse thundered. He turned his head, just slightly, breaking his gaze from the door, from the glass. And the reflection moved before he did. Not a delay. Not a hesitation. It turned first. And Daniel knew. It wasn't him anymore. He twisted away, his breath coming in shallow bursts, his body screaming for escape. The emergency exit, he had the key, he could get out, he just had to. The lights went out. Not flickered. Not dimmed. Just gone. The old sconces along the hallway. The weak glow from the lobby ceiling. Even the dull, buzzing exit signs. Everything. Pure, suffocating blackness swallowed the theater whole. Daniel froze. Somewhere in the distance, the old movie screen groaned. Not the projector, there hadn't been film here in years. But the screen itself, stretched over its wooden frame, shifting in the darkness, breathing like an old, sleeping thing. Daniel's flashlight, his only lifeline, shook in his grip as he flicked the switch. Nothing. Dead. The whispering returned. Low and warping, curling against the edges of the silence like smoke, pressing into his ears, his skin, his thoughts. But now it wasn't just whispers. It was laughter. Not loud. Not manic. Something worse. Something soft. A quiet, knowing chuckle that filled the space around him, that came from nowhere and everywhere. The darkness pulsed. A sound closer than it should be. Step. Not behind him. Not ahead. But to his left. Daniel jerked in that direction, his muscles locking up. His eyes strained in the pitch black, searching, waiting, knowing he wouldn't see anything but still feeling it there. Another step. This time to his right. A shuffle. A shift in the air. The shape the thing from the storage room hadn't left. It had just changed places. Daniel's breath hitched. His back hit something, solely the concession counter. He had nowhere left to go. His fingers dug into the edge of the counter, his knuckles white, his body refusing to run because there was nowhere to run to anymore. The whispering stopped again. And then, a hand. On his shoulder. Pulled. Wrong. Not skin. Something that felt almost like skin, but smoother, stretched too tight over too thin bones. A grip that didn't tighten but pressed, as if testing him, feeling the shape of him, deciding what to take. Daniel couldn't move. The breath against his ear wasn't his own. And then, a voice. Not in his head. Not from the reflection. Not from the darkness behind the storage room door. But right beside him. Close enough to crawl under his skin. Soft. Gentle. Familiar. You don't belong here. The grip on his shoulder tightened. Daniel's vision blurred. His body jerked. And then, everything collapsed inward. The dark pulled. The air folded. The theater. The glass. The door. His own body. All of it snapped shut. Like the final frame of a film reel burning in the projector. Gone. Just like that. Fade to black. The next morning, the theater sat undisturbed. The lights still worked. The old film reels remained stacked in their places. The storage room door stood closed. And behind the glass of the theater's front doors, in the faint reflection of the city waking up outside, a figure stood, still, motionless, smiling. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story.